All right, everyone. We're here with Michael Goorevich, and Michael is a architect in Nashville, and we've been able to do a lot of just really incredible projects with Michael over the years. And one of the ones that we've always loved is his approach to renovations and what he's doing with renovations. And so, Michael, thanks for being on the podcast. Really appreciate you taking the time
Thanks for
to
asking.
be here. Yeah, absolutely. And so we'd love to just start with sharing a little bit about your architectural approach in what you've been doing in Nashville.
Let's see. I've had my own studio for about 12 years. We're a studio of two people, so we're small but mighty. Our work is, I would say it's half renovations, half and additions, half new homes. Almost everything we do is residential. Our approach is, for the most part, pretty simple. Figure out what the authentic problem is to every project that comes our way and try to answer that question as best we can.
Yeah, and one of the things that I've noticed with your projects, and I don't remember if this was a term that we coined or something that you've mentioned in your own approach, but this idea of Middle Tennessee modern. And what is, if you could describe what Middle Tennessee modern is, or even what the architectural landscape is in Nashville, what would that be?
Well, the architectural landscape in Nashville is a separate question, and I would say it's a little trickier to answer.
Yeah.
What I see around me is a sort of generic isn't the right word because there's nothing necessarily generic about it, but
Mm-hmm.
the work that's being built now, what I would call contemporary only because it's being built now, it could be built anywhere. It doesn't have to
Yeah.
necessarily be. If one were to just look at the new examples of buildings, you would be unaware if you're in the middle America, outside New York City, somewhere in Washington State. It would be very hard to identify where you are. That comes down to a question of style.
Yeah.
Irregardless of the building technologies that you engage, the systems that you use in your buildings, your use of roofs, details, gutters, downspouts, your choice of your architectural language is irregardless of that context. Um,
Yeah.
so what makes Middle Tennessee architecture to me, I guess, is the fact that I am a Middle Tennessee architect. And I came here from a different region of the country. I came from the Northeast. And when I did first come here, I started applying the things I knew from there and then quickly learned this was a really different place. And how did I learn it? Trial and error. Some of the things that I proposed really didn't go very well down here. The thing that hit the first was the humidity, but it was the humidity then followed by a very dry and very cold winter. And suddenly I realized this place has winter. This place has summer. It has super rainy seasons. It has then followed by incredibly dry moments with, a lot of sun. Middle Tennessee is part of a bigger, much larger deciduous forest that you wouldn't necessarily find in other parts of the country, which means the leaves fall. And we don't really get a lot of snow here, but we get a lot of freezing rain and a lot of ice. So what started becoming Middle Tennessee architecture for me was first realizing that the climate I was in, and the microclimate in particular, is different than even Alabama, and it's different than Ohio. And those places are not that far away. And then
Yeah.
as you keep moving further north and south, or you move east and west, the climate keeps getting very different. East Tennessee is not the same as Middle Tennessee, is not the same as West Tennessee. So if you start to really try to respond naturally with the building, how do I answer those questions? Well, that starts to lead you into a very particular way of looking at your architecture. Layer on top of that the culture. The culture here is specific. Nashville, people come to visit here because it has a specific culture, which is also sort of disappearing as the architecture becomes more generic.
Yeah.
So does the culture. Trying to tap into that, but not just make a barn. I like
Right.
modern barns. I like modern twists on old things. That's
Yeah.
again a very shallow way of looking at the problems, and we like to swim deeper if we can.
Yeah. So you're not here just making barn dominiums and
No
large
interest
spaces.
no interest
Yeah.
in looking at things that way. And what I've been grateful of, I've been lucky that I call them my partners, my clients are partners in these endeavors. They're not interested in that either. They had those opportunities, and for whatever reason, they didn't choose to buy one of those properties. They didn't choose to go that route, and they did want to look at something more authentic. And that's where the real joy gets to be. How do you answer these questions authentically? So if I start to look like I have a style to what I do, it's because I'm making all my buildings in Middle Tennessee. So
Yeah.
I am constantly getting an opportunity. I don't think this is a bad thing, but I'm getting the opportunity to re-examine a similar problem over and over, but always with a new client and a new site. So that allows me to explore different things. So again, I feel like we get to go deeper and deeper.
And you're originally from Buffalo, correct?
Yeah, originally
And
from
so,
Buffalo,
yeah,
very
and
different.
very, very different. But even from an architectural standpoint, would you say that if you were building a modern home in Buffalo, that you would approach it differently than a modern home in Nashville?
And again, it would start with climate, microclimate again. And even in Buffalo, you get two microclimates that are interesting. So everyone hears about Buffalo and snow. Well, the
Yeah.
snow actually has a snow belt, which it cuts kind of right through the middle of the city. If you're on the northwest side of the city, you could potentially be outside of the snow belt. But if you're on the south side of the city, in Orchard Park where the Bills play, well, you're in the middle of the snow belt. Well, the
Mm,
middle. It runs from there to just the east side of Cleveland. So your snow accumulation can be completely different. They could have
yeah.
3 or 4 feet of snow, where the other side of town could have 6 inches. Well, don't you think one should think about a roof differently if those are the
Mm,
situations that they face? I think so. And it's not just that the architecture should respond different, but it's kind of fun that it can respond differently, then does lead you into architectural things. And architectural things are beyond just solving those problems. It's using those problems to mold and shape space, and specifically to mold and shape light. That's an old fashioned way of, and an old fashioned yet modern interest in architecture, molding light. And I think there is nothing more important to do than that. So that's always the goal. All of this stuff, culture and climate, is really all then about trying to frame the opportunity to mold and frame light.
yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. And you mentioned sort of the generic contemporary that we're all experiencing. I mean, I'm in Austin, so everything that's a suburb, like you said, you could take that suburb and you could put it anywhere in America, and it would feel like the same place.
I
But
think
then you have,
a
go
big
ahead.
part of that is because while architects are involved in a lot of that, they're not driving those stories. Those narratives are being driven by developers, and developers look around to see what else is, what's the other guy doing that's making money? Well, that's what I'm going to do. And
Yeah,
and so it's this sort of self-referential thing, and they look at each other, and they don't just look at each other in the same city. They look at each other in other cities and other places.
yeah, and it's driven by a bottom line versus driven by a particular client and their specific needs.
Different aspirations.
Absolutely. And in Austin, Austin's very progressive with our architecture. We have, a very strong architectural community. But when people say modern, that can take on a lot of different forms. Sometimes modern is a giant white box and a flat roof. And sometimes modern is huge, sweeping, sloped roofs and giant amounts of glass. So when you think of pairing Middle Tennessee and then pairing the word modern in modern architecture, what does that mean to you?
So I guess it is two things at once, or three things at once. So one is, I'm not unaware of what goes on in architecture around the world. In our studio, Jack and myself are paying attention to that all the time. And we're constantly talking about it. It's our interest. It's not just our vocation. So having an eye, even though we're off to the, I'm looking at my screen, we're off to the, periphery and edge of architectural culture. We
Yeah.
like to think of ourselves as, if not being part of it, at least paying
Yeah.
attention
And
to
you
it.
travel to a lot of places with architecture too, right?
For sure, we take field trips. We go to see it. It's hard to beat seeing it, and we pay attention that way. So that's already one step into, call it, this pool of modernism. The second is not just paying attention to what's culturally current, but we have a deep reservoir of knowledge about what's been built around the world, going all the way back to the primitive, buildings in different areas, from Africa to Asia to South America, to what architects are doing there now and what they did. Modern and modernism was, modern and modernism are two different things, even in my mind. Modernism is a historical term, that's talking
Yeah.
about a period of time. Well, we paid attention and love all of that work too, for all the different utopian reasons it existed, for all the different, trying out new theories. And nonetheless, the work that came from all of those things interest us greatly. But I would, so those are two different things. There's the paying attention to what's current, there's paying attention to the history of it all and how it developed. But the third and most important one is just, again, asking and answering an authentic question. So if you're looking at the question authentically, it means you're taking all of that stuff, but you're certainly not copying it. You're trying to take from it the useful things that can help you answer a current question. And so that's why a lot of my work involves wood and wood architecture. To me, it had a cultural response to Middle Tennessee, but it also has a modern, sustainable response to building in general in Middle Tennessee.
Yeah.
But I certainly am not making shotgun shacks, and I'm certainly not making log cabins.
Yeah.
Tapping into it, but then using it for something new. To me, that's what's really modern. I think I've often said to my clients, think of this really as not a style, but yes, we are going to tailor a suit to you, and the suit is going to fit you, and it's not going to necessarily fit anybody else. It will be the material that you choose, and the colors, the textures, everything. It will be a tailor-made thing for you.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And when you look at that design and modernism, I think sometimes people can hear modern and think that's futuristic, but I think and I'd love to hear your take on the futurism part of it. Is it something where you're designing for the moment and what is modern in the moment, or in your designs, are you sort of trying to almost anticipate uh, what trends could be? If you're looking forward and back, because I think a huge part of resiliency and sustainability is a design that people aren't going to want to tear down in 10 years. And sometimes you see these modern homes and you think, yeah, that's good in the moment, but 20, 30 years from now, are people going to want a house that looks like that? It feels trendy. So how do you escape that challenge of trendiness versus something that's modern?
Well, first, I think it's easy for me because I suck at being trendy. Ask my wife. I never wear the right clothes. I never say the right thing. Like trendy is actually really hard. One
Yeah,
has
so
to
you're
take a
not you're
lot of,
not going to go viral then, you're saying. You're
no, hasn't happened yet. So I don't see why it's going to in the future. So how do you put this? I think most people, meaning non-architects and even some
hmm
architects, but most non-architects in the United States in particular, because of what they're exposed to, have a very, very, very small sense and exposure to what modern architecture is.
Yeah,
Most people don't have a clue. If they've ever even heard of Frank Lloyd Wright, that's the only architect that they've ever heard of. The
right.
culture and history is so deep and so rich, filled with so many different types of buildings. Like the word ontological, it's something that means it's at the base of it. Well, in
Yeah,
America, we seem to think there's only one or two bases for all this stuff, and it's not true. There's hundreds of them that all lead to incredibly different solutions. I think from the user side or the client side, if we had a richer sense of what that is, we would be making richer, more diversified things that I think not would enrich our built environment in a way that no people wouldn't want to be tearing down buildings so
yeah,
quickly, and they wouldn't necessarily feel that way. Interestingly, of course, all fads do seem to come back around again. So for
yeah,
a while we were tearing down mid-century homes. Now everybody loves a mid-century home, to the point
yeah,
where now mid-century is a term everyone is familiar with and everyone knows. It's like it's
yeah.
completely out there in the
They know of
culture.
that modern era, if no others. Yeah,
How do I avoid it? I have often said, because I was taught this by someone else, one of the most sustainable ways to address a building is to build a building that will be here for 100 years. That will more than make up for its embodied energy that it took to build the thing. If you make a piece of crap and it's only going to be around for a short period of time, there's nothing sustainable about that, regardless if it has great insulation, a solar array, and it's using geothermal. It has to be that you answer that question to a deeper level. And yes, we tear down way too many buildings in this country, and we tear them down way too fast. And we tear them down for reasons as basic as this is no longer our trend. And it gets back to your renovation question. Well, instead of tearing that building down, is there something else that you can do to that building where you can save its foundation, you can save its frame or parts of it? and then turn it into this newer version of what it wants to be. That literally does get to your renovation addition question.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's touch on that because when you approach a client and they have a current house, how often do they think the only solution or the best solution is to just strip it to the foundation and build new versus opportunities that you have to show them, no, there's a lot of great pieces and options for this particular house.
So I would say that most of my addition renovation projects do often start with the question of money. They all
Yeah.
start there. Either they are clients that wanted to build something new and just figured out that they couldn't, or through a discussion about what the real costs for being that ambitious are, they came to realize that there wasn't another option. Sometimes they don't even think that you can achieve their dream with a renovation. You have to kind of convince them
Yeah.
that actually you can do that. So it does always start with money. But one thing that I then try to quickly talk about, because I love renovation additions as much as I love new homes. New
Yeah.
homes they're two different questions. Of the new home, I get to again authentically ask, what problem do I even want to pose and answer? Because I get to pose the problem in this case. There's
Yeah.
a lot of criteria and givens that go into it, but it's so cool to get to think of it from such a clean slate. Renovation addition means there's a whole much larger set of givens that you're dealing with in the project, but that's not a bad thing. The first question I ask is, what is the best version of this? Of what best version of itself does this thing want to be? That's A. But then B is, because you're going to ask and answer that question, and there's already this building that exists that you didn't, design in the first place. You sort of get to do things that you would never typically do. And you get this relationship between old and new that can't exist in a new house,
Yeah.
which can lead to opportunities. And I mean, by opportunities, again, I mean architectural opportunities. And again, I mean sculpting and shaping light that you can't
Yeah.
typically or would never have proposed to do because of the way you're solving a problem. A very basic way of saying that, or an example of that, is I do a lot of ranch renovations. And the ceilings are all flat when I get those houses, but we lift a lot of those ceilings and we cathedral them. But we cathedral them in a way that we then bring in light monitors and we shape the ceilings in a way that we feel like we're sculpting space, like
Yeah.
literally feel like we're sculpting. Often I would not approach ceilings that same way if it were a new building, because I would have thought about it not as correcting something, but as proposing something. It's amazing what you get to do. And then if I'm skipping all the way to the end, what's really cool is clients not realizing that their house all along could have been this. It could have done this. And they're
Yeah.
all always shocked that the bones of what, this new dream ended up being was there all the time. They just didn't know it.
They just couldn't see it. And I love that about renovations too, is that to your point, you're creating a piece of architecture that if you were starting with a clean slate, you probably would not have come up with that exact house. But because of the constraints that you were within, and so you can look at some of your renovations, and we'll talk about a couple that I think really fit this model. But if you just started from scratch and you said design a house for these people with all things being equal, you would never typically design it the way that you would be renovating their current house. And that's what I think makes it so not only challenging, but such a great opportunity that you have, because you are creating a one of a kind thing because of what you're starting with, not just because you're starting with zero constraints.
And it even gets extra interesting when that same person comes back to you for a second or even a third renovation on top of it. So now that narrative is getting spread over time, like huge
Yeah.
amounts of time, which means you're always thinking about new ways of doing things, which may not even be the same as the last time you were at the house and did something. And they end up making just complex houses of really interesting things that would never happen in a million years if you were thinking of it yourself. It's more
Yeah.
like collaging. And one of the magical things about collaging is being able to come up with something incredibly complex that you probably would not have done if you were thinking of it as a singular thing, because I would tend to try to simplify things instead of making them more complex.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And so let's talk about one of those houses, and that's what's been coined as the Hat House. Uh, and talk a little bit about describe what the Hat House is and what the challenges were specific to that, because I think it really proves your point of the light play, how you're going to bring light into a space, which is also something that if you're thinking of contemporary generic homes, production built homes, that's never a thought. They don't put windows in because of the light play. They put
Mhm.
windows in that space because of, that's the deal that they got, and that is the most efficient possible way to build a house. So talk about the house and how you're able to use light play and create that renovation
Sure.
specifically.
So it was a really interesting and, I thought, for me, fortunate and lucky house to get to work on. It's in a neighborhood in Nashville that, according to its current zoning code, one can't have flat roofs. They consider a flat roof anything that is less than a 3 and 12 slope, which is nowhere
Wow.
near flat.
No.
And you're only allowed to have up to 30% of the house even be that. So it was
Wow.
a code that was designed to promote traditional homes and try to have
Yeah.
traditional roofs. This home predated that zoning code change. So it was a mid-century flat roofed and really flat roofed in this case, meaning it had central drains in the house.
Yeah.
And it had this centerpiece to it that, while at the time, so here's your trendy thing. At the time, this would have been a trendy and cost effective thing to do. The middle of the house kind of had a mansard roof on it with a clear story of windows below. The mansard roof looked like a Denny's or a Pizza Hut,
Yeah.
and it was clad in asphalt shingles. So it's like this house was like almost great.
Yeah, right. Like they just missed. Again, it's like those modern houses that are like they're using the elements, but they just are slightly off.
Yeah. And it had great light, great space. It had brick inside and out. It actually had some terrazzo floors originally on a killer site. Like, the site was gorgeous. Most people, and by most, like really almost anybody, would have torn this house down
Yeah.
because the site had
They would
enough
have saw that
room.
Denny's and said, "Yeah, time for something
Yeah.
else."
But the owners, they had a vision for the house. They loved it. This is what ends up also being a part of renovation additions, are special homeowners that actually see the potential in these kinds of things. And they don't necessarily know where we're going to end up, but they know they love it and they know it feels good, and they'll figure out and trust that the rest will get there. I had driven past this house for a long time, and a builder that I work with, who wasn't the builder of the project, but a different builder. He happens to live across the street. And he told me, he's like, wouldn't it be cool if you worked on this someday? And I was like, yeah, this would be an amazing house.
Yeah.
I'm looking at your baseball cap right now. It just needs a new hat. Like, if this
Yeah.
thing, if you did nothing more than fix the mansard roof and nothing else, this house would be 1,000 times better. And then I fast forward a year, I was lucky enough by another builder to get to work on the house. And really lucky, I was really only asked at first to work on the kitchen and a bathroom vanity. And then the
Yeah.
project just kept growing and growing to the point where we really did the whole house and we actually got to put the new hat on.
Yeah. And so describe how you were able to, because you kept, that you didn't tear down the hat, you didn't remove it, but you essentially just reframed it. You just put a new skin on it. You put a new, baseball hat on. And so, how did you decide on what that was going to look like? And was it really driven by a particular style or technique? I mean, or did you just feel like we can't get rid of this focal point?
So I knew I liked the overall profile of the house. I never wanted to change that. But the way it was built. It's a square in the middle of the. It's like a story and a half square in the middle of the house, and it was framed with these gigantic trusses. I mean, they're 8 foot tall trusses to span the space, and they were even sort of handmade trusses.
Yeah.
So I kind of knew from there, like, why tear down this robust structure that's already working and doing fine. Like it's why not capitalize again, just like on the foundation, capitalize on this pretty massive structure that's there. Anything else that we would have come back with would have been 4 times as expensive and use far more material and probably still not be as robust as these trusses.
Yeah.
So but I knew that they could hold up anything that we wanted to do. The base of the building is sort of this long rectangle. Then there's this clear story of glass. The goal was to make the glass section more transparent than it really was, which we were able to do. We kind of reframed. By reframed, I just mean proportions and how we put pieces and parts back together, make the glass appear more glassy.
Yeah.
But then I thought, my initial impulse was, if you make that more glassy, wouldn't it just be beautiful to have another box hovering above it? A box, not obviously the mansard was a shape. It's a
Yeah.
particular shape. That already kind of told me that shapy things wasn't what this house wanted. That just kind of
Yeah.
looks stupid. Why not mirror the box down below and bring levitation, a sense of levitation into the project? Often architects, that's also a fairly trendy thing over the last 20 years, making things float. I
Yeah.
just happen to have trusses that could actually accommodate this, because they were making these like over 3 foot and 4 foot overhangs that were already supported. So the hard part was already done for me.
Yeah.
And then why did it finally take the shape that it did is I've been using, again, modified wood products and using Kebony in particular, which I had been having success with on a few projects before, where I'm realizing I can use wood now in this harsh Middle Tennessee environment, and it's going to do as well as brick or stone. That was a pretty incredible thing to learn. Well, now I'm able to bring that sense of materiality to a house like this that had a brick base. So give it a wood top, which I also, not only visually is it lighter, which I liked, which increased the levitation of the project, but it literally is lighter. So I knew that these
Yeah.
trusses were not going to have any issue holding up this much lighter facade. So, like an
Yeah.
example, I could have come back with more brick, but I don't know that it would have been too weighty, too heavy, and I don't think that it would have worked particularly well. And a lot of my projects have sloped roofs, but if I would have added a sloped roof to this thing for better drainage, it would have killed the profiles of this house. So this is one where the cultural response to the house took more weight than drainage scenario. But what we did to solve that, we still had perimeter drains for everything. We ran the water from this floating box
Yeah.
down outside of the building envelope onto the lower roof. So we never brought the water back into the house. And we took out the central drains of the flat roof of the original house, and we did conduct the water to a perimeter gutter downspout system that we added. Did it take away architecturally from the house? Yeah, a little bit, but it was by far the better solution, because it meant everything
Yeah.
went to the perimeter and we got rid of the leaves in the water instead of bringing it through the middle of the house, where eventually those drains would have all failed. People
Yeah.
always think that flat roofs are like bad, and they're not. Like 90% of the built environment in the United States is a flat roof.
Yeah.
Every
Yeah.
every big
Every
box.
commercial building. Yeah.
The difference is someone's going up and maintaining the roof in the commercial building, and on a house they're not. So if you treat it the right way, you don't have parapets, you don't have scuppers, you don't do that. Leaves can't build up. They find a downspout and a drain, and there you go.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, and this change too was relatively simple in the terms of, you didn't have to tear down walls or anything. You essentially re-sided this, and the result is, a infinitely more beautiful home. It's been featured in, all kinds of different magazines, and it was just such a simple change, which I think really shows that you don't have to make this huge mark, to make an impact on a renovation. Another really cool house, I think, which, speaks to the ranches that you normally work with, was a ranch that you've affectionately called the two-faced house. And so tell us a little bit about that project, and how you were able to renovate that small ranch and bring in light. and play with light on that one.
So that one was a perfect example of the owner, when they started the project, really would have liked a ground up house, but there was
Yeah.
no ground up modern, and I mean modernism, modern house.
Yeah.
But there he didn't have the means to do that. So we started looking for something that he could renovate, and he ended up finding a house that, based on its site conditions and the way one would view it and see it, that we could laminate something onto the back of the house. By laminating, I mean we added a bar to the back of it. The
Yeah.
bar solved all of the spatial problems, all the added space that he wanted. The bar is, I think it's 12 feet deep, but it was deep enough to reconfigure everything in the house to meet his family needs and the program that he wanted. But it also, we just kind of realized, when you're in the backyard, you won't be able to see the rest of the house, which
Yeah.
meant he could have his modern house from the backyard, where you cannot see the more colonial. No, it's not Georgian. Just a colonial rancher that's on the
Yeah.
front.
It's just a very basic. I mean, just think of the most basic ranch you've ever seen.
Yeah.
Small, very unassuming. That's what it looks like from the front.
So what became then the party and the fun thing about it was, what's that saying? Party on the back and playing on
Yeah.
the front.
Business in the front and party in the back. Yeah. It's a mullet house for sure.
Yes, I should have called it the mullet house.
Yeah.
But and it is neat that the way it is configured and the program allowed it, that you really can't see one side from the other. So that is another interesting. It is the perfect example of, you get to do something you never in a million years would have done. The hat house was more of, how do we reshape this existing thing to give it just a little bit more finesse that would have made it a better house. This is doing something slightly schizophrenic. It's adding on
Yeah.
this incredibly modern thing, and then, Jekyll and hiding it to the other side. But it works. Why not approach the problem that way? So what risk are you taking there? Is that, well, what you've done is completely stupid. So that comes, through building models and
Yeah.
doing renderings in the computer, and really, really testing your idea before you actually, go to execute it.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And one of the things I love about that house too is the ceiling and the skylight where you opened up in the kitchen. And talk about your approach to windows and your approach to ceilings, because I feel like that's something I had never heard before that I thought was so interesting.
So a lot of these ranch houses, that are all over Nashville, they're kind of bifurcated rectangles. They have a front and a back and a spine that runs up the middle, which is what the gable is aligned with. You can lift ceilings on both sides of that wall, and in limited areas you can really lift everything, but one wouldn't want to get rid of all of it, or you're suddenly replacing the spine of the house, which is, you're suddenly getting into, again, a lot of expense.
Hmm.
So how did we treat this? We lifted all of the spaces that were public. The living room, so we had the windows, the traditional windows on the front of the house. We made some of the sills bigger, so maybe it was a 3-foot tall window that we then made floor to ceiling, but it meant we didn't have to change the header. We just lowered the sill so we could
Yeah.
get a bigger window. But for the most part, those were punched openings. And so you got the kind of view and the kind of light that you get from a punched opening. But the back of the house is a full facade of glass. And so when you're standing in the kitchen, if you look to the front of the house where the street is, you're looking through a punched opening. You look to the back, it is a full wall of glass. So that's the first treatment of light, is that it gets flooded with light from the back, and then it has more intimate light from the front. They're two different types of light. By lifting the ceiling, it allowed us, because the kitchen was at the end of the building, to put a tall, high window at the end of this brick house. And it's looking up a hill towards a park and some beautiful trees. It meant now that this one room had light coming from 3 sides, and it had 3 different types of light. Full wall of glass, punched opening, and now it had zenithal light dropping down into the space from above. So as the sun arcs through the day and it changes through the year, it means the room is constantly changing. All of this was possible by lifting the ceiling. We do other tricky things when it comes to lifting the ceiling, like we try very hard not to put any light fixtures in it, and we try to hold it off the edge of the walls. They often don't meet the walls except at a trough. Sometimes we've used that trough to hide return air plenums, like this one has too. There's a way for air to return at the top, which acts like a ceiling fan, but it ended up making this very animated space. Next to that space is a living room where we also lifted the ceiling. And that living room has one very small skylight in it. It's only like a 2 foot by 5 foot skylight. But that one little moment up high in that space completely animates the space with this pretty incredible light. It was a pretty cheap thing to do. It was not a big skylight or a difficult thing to build, and the space was already there, but it had such an effect. It feels like you've turned a light switch on in a more sculptural, interesting way. And then it still had its part of that laminated wall that had a full wall of glass again. So I guess we are orchestrating these things and thinking about them constantly when we're lifting ceilings or doing something. And we have a new bunch of projects that are either being built right now or are on our drawing board. And once we identified that we were doing this with ceilings, now we're all in on it, and we're
Yeah.
testing different ways of doing that with curves and placements of skylights. We now know the difference between what it feels like when it's on the north side or the south side, the size of the open. We are now running with this idea, and pretty much if anyone is asking to renovate Nashville, so this is where that style question comes in.
Yeah.
If anyone's asking for a Nashville renovation of a ranch, we are already thinking that we're going to probably be doing something like this, and it ends up being same different for everybody.
Yeah. And it is one of those things that, again, we get so inundated and so used to the way that our built environment is all the time, but so many of the buildings we go into are completely based on function and have no form. And that's why, I'm in a newly built home, and it probably has 85 pot lights in that ceiling. And you think, well, this is just how you build homes. And then you walk into a home like that two face house. It has two things that you immediately notice. One is that there are no pot lights in the ceiling. There is no return air. There is nothing on that ceiling. It is a blank canvas when you walk in. And so all you see is light reflecting off of that beautiful white ceiling, and suddenly it becomes a point of a benefit to the aesthetic versus something that is purely there to hold a bunch of lights shooting down at you. Now it's bringing that ambient light and that soft light that everyone would really love, but they don't think that that's a possibility. Because the thing is, no one turns on their can lights. That I don't turn my can lights on. It's the harshest light you'll ever have. So unless I got to find an earring on the floor, those lights aren't turning on. And so it brings in so much light naturally that is the light that we really crave anyways. And I love the detail of the window as well, where you put the window in that gable and the glass, just by putting that 2 inch lip, and we'll include some photos and stuff on the show notes of this, but it looks like the glass just goes forever, like it goes into the ceiling and you never see it.
And that's one of the things that we love about it too. And that ended up being an idea that we took into a house that's under construction right now, where it's a brand new house, but we dropped the ceiling far enough that you cannot see the top of the windows from anywhere. So the windows truly do look like along the full length of the building. They go on forever. So what you're also kind of talking about are layers of pet peeves that you sort of develop to over time. Ceilings are the dumping grounds for all of your systems. That's for not plumbing so much, but mechanical and electrical.
Mm-hmm.
If someone just simply asks a electrician to light a room, which is how a developer typically goes about it, they have their rules of thumb about how many lights they're going to put in based on square footage, and they just do it. No one is thinking about it.
Yeah.
So that's another part of the equation that's different when you engage, I guess, an engaged architect versus a developer who's going straight to trades. We are stopping and thinking about those 1,000 different little things that make the difference between one kind of a space and another. If you just let all that happen, it doesn't really matter what we design. It's going to be ugly, and someone is going to want to tear it down in 20 years.
Yeah.
And it all started for me with, yes, that light is really harsh and terrible. And wouldn't it be great if a room could glow? How did I experience or think that? Because I was once in a room that glowed. And it's like, whoa, how did they do this? And it's, oh, the light comes from everywhere. It doesn't come from one place. And it's interesting and difficult to know that with every one of our projects, we do have to teach is the wrong word, but inform our clients
Yeah.
about why all these
Educate.
decisions are the way they are. They may in the end appear to be a style, but they really are answering questions a better way, or at least a different way than what is typical.
Yeah, and I think that the more that we can do it, the more that people can understand it, then the more they'll see that there are other options out there. And so that's really what
And then I
our
and
hope
then I
is.
think it goes one step further than why are you doing any of this in the first place? Well, because homes are where you spend other than your job, you spend all
Yeah,
of your time, and it's where all your, you know, life moments all happen from, from everyday dinner to someone's birthday to celebrating a major life something. Well, shouldn't the damn space be as important as those moments, and shouldn't it
yeah,
respond to those moments in the same way? I think that energizes all of that. So what I find is my clients through the process, because it's a long and difficult process, finding an attachment and an engagement to their house that most people don't have to their houses. And then that infuses all of their life experience, all those things that they do every day, from doing your laundry to something special. That's the goal.
yeah, absolutely. Well, that's a perfect place to end. And there's so many other things that I would love to ask you about. So we'll have to have you on again because we didn't even touch on some of your most iconic features like slat walls and other ways that you play with light. But this has been just such a great conversation, Michael. Thank you so much for being on the podcast and just sharing some of those renovation ideas and thoughts and your approach. You have a great rest of your day, and yeah, we look forward to speaking again and getting on some of those new projects as well. We definitely want to
Thanks,
talk
Ben.
about
Always
those.
love talking to you. You always ask awesome questions.
Thank you so much, and you have a great rest of your day.
You too. Bye.
Bye.